The John Sterling Show.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And now, let's go to the 77 WABC ActionCarting.com phone line. New York City's premier waste and recycling provider. We have a really good friend of mine on about now. His name is Tom Hamilton. He's a longtime voice of the Cleveland Indians. A special year for Tom because he's going into the Hall of Fame this summer. Isn't that great? How are you, my boy?
Hello, John. Good to talk to you. How have you been?
Good. Yeah, celebrated a birthday yesterday.
Yes, you did.
Getting a year older. But, you know, when you think of what would be the opposite of that, I'm really happy to get a year older. So how are you doing?
I am doing great, John, and hope you and your family are doing well. And just we miss seeing you at the ballpark, but know you're enjoying retirement, and you're a Hall of Famer and should have been in Cooperstown a long time ago. So you know how much I think of you and your work.
Well, I thank you, Tom. You know, I think you started, I think you told me the story. I think you started 1 year after I started with the Yankees. Did you start in 1990 with the...
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And first ball game that I ever did in the major leagues was supposed to be at Yankee Stadium to open up that season. But if you remember, we were still in the midst of a lockout strike, whatever they want to call it. And that first week got postponed and squeezed in at various times throughout that summer. And so the first major league game I ever did was still against New York, but it was during a weeknight in Cleveland. And in the fourth inning, a blizzard came off Lake Erie and canceled it in the fourth inning. So it's kind of like, welcome to Cleveland.
You know, the first game I did for the Yanks, Tommy John pitched. It was in Minnesota, and he won the game 2-0. And he could still pitch, you know, he throwing his junk.
Sure.
But you know what he couldn't do? He couldn't field his position. You can get killed out there. And so after a while, that's why he retired. He retired maybe in May or June because he couldn't field his spot. You can get hurt with a ball whistling by you. Tell us about the Indians. The Guardians. I got to put a dollar in some pot somewhere. They always seem to do a little better than they're expected. What do you think this year? I know this year in your division, Detroit has been the runaway leader.
It's been a bizarre last 6 weeks, John, because a year ago the AL Central was arguably the most competitive division in baseball, and three teams from the Central made it into the playoffs. And it looked kind of like deja vu back in, the second week in May. There were four teams in the Central above 500. Looked like we had the makings of what could be a great summer race. And 6 to 7 weeks later, it's been a total go over the cliff for the division. There's nobody even remotely close to 500 in the division outside of the Detroit Tigers. And they have easily been the best ball club in the American League up to this point, although the Houston Astros now are making a familiar surge and have really kind of closed that gap with themselves and Detroit for the best record in the American League. But, Detroit's going to win this division handily. And the way things look right now, unless there's a dramatic turnaround, it'll be a one-bid division only because nobody else right now. Everybody's in the American League wildcard chase. But, John, I don't know how you feel. I have always felt until you're a 500 ball club, you're not a playoff contender. And, right now Cleveland's 6 games under 500, and the whole division's like that outside of Detroit. So it's bizarre how quickly it changed.
I always feel that Cleveland's going to do well. I don't know why, but they always seem to. And I also thought, Tom, that Kansas City was going to be a big team. Yeah. Last year, they had a terrific season. The Yankees knocked them out in the playoffs, but they were an awfully good team, and they've had a very disappointing year.
Well, I think the one common denominator between Cleveland and Kansas City is that they both have a superstar that's as good as any player in the league, Bobby Witt Jr. for the Royals and Jose Ramirez for Cleveland, but one man can't carry an offense. And, John, we have not seen many teams with really good offenses this year. Now, we're playing Detroit this weekend. They have a really good offense. It's a deep lineup. We just played the Cubs. They were about as impressive as we have seen to this point. And again, a lot of times you're a prisoner of the moment, and you're also not who you play, but when you play them. And the Cubs are playing well right now. But the best teams that I have seen so far this year are in the National League, outside of what we're seeing now from the Detroit Tigers.
Well, I would agree with you. And people tell me, well, the National League is so much better. That's all changed because you remember, Tom, for years, the American League just killed them in the series.
In the league, yeah.
But, it has to do with, well, obviously, it has to do with players. And so, obviously, the National League's been coming up with better players.
Yeah, and it's cyclical, as we all know. And, Austin Hedges, in visiting with him, made a great point. He said, no matter who wins the American League pennant, and obviously we have a long way to go for that, still half the season, but he goes, you don't have to beat 6 National League teams. You only have to get to the World Series and beat one team.
That's right.
And it's a great point because, to your point, John, there were a number of years that I thought, like, for instance, the great 98 Yankees ball club, Cleveland had New York not on the ropes, but had their backs up against the wall for maybe the first time all year, and New York rallied in that series here in Cleveland, and you kind of felt like, in my mind, the best 2 teams in baseball were Cleveland and New York that year, and of course New York rampaged in the World Series over San Diego, and I felt that way in 2007 when Boston beat us in 7 games and then swept the Colorado Rockies, and so there have been years where you felt like, whoever wins the American League is heads and tails better than anybody in the National League. But, this year the shoe's on the other foot.
I'll tell you a story, Tom, and boy, am I going to awaken memories in you. In the Indians, in the Guardians-Yankees playoff that you were talking about, the Yankees had lost 2 games, and they were down 2-1, and if they lose in Cleveland for the second of 3 games, they're going to be down 3-1, and no one ever expected it after winning 114 games. Well, anyway, the Yankees didn't score in the top of the first, and in the bottom of the first inning, the Indians had 2 on and 2 out, I think.
El Duque.
Yes, El Duque was pitching, and he hated left-hand hitters because his slow curves worked better against righties than lefties. And Jim Thome was up.
Oh, yep.
See, he remembers, and he hit one.
I thought when Thome hit it, it was out. I thought it's 3-0 Cleveland. And Paul O'Neill caught it with his back up against the wall, and New York never blinked from that point forward. El Duque was magnificent.
Well, on the air, being the jerk I am, Thome hits the ball, and I said, it's going to stay in the park. And then, as you say, O'Neill caught it with his back to the wall. So we go to commercial, and Michael Kay said to me, how did you know that? Do you know what you said? And I said, well, I thought it, And that was the biggest game for the Yankees that year, by far. Yes. And they went on to win on the Sunday game in Cleveland, then won in New York. But Yankees in Cleveland have had some great postseason games, haven't they?
Yeah, they really have. And it's always fun. It's such an electric atmosphere in both ballparks when the 2 teams play. And look, everybody looks at New York as their rival, but here in Cleveland, it was really true in the 40s and 50s. It's certainly before my time, but when you look at the record books and you talk to the people, those were the years where it was either New York or Cleveland, that was usually the best team in the American League. And, in 48, Cleveland won the World Series. And then in 54, they beat out the Yankees, but lost to the Giants in the World Series. But those were years where New York was just dominating, and Cleveland had really good teams with Bob Feller and Bob Lemon and Early Wynn, and you can go on and on and on, Larry Doby. But I think so, John, in a lot of ways, here at least in Cleveland, that rivalry, goes back a long ways when both teams were really good in the 40s and 50s. And, then we had some classic matchups, in the 90s between Cleveland and New York. And, it happened again in 07 when Cleveland eliminated New York. And, it's happened here recently. The Yankees, I thought our 2017 team was better than the World Series team the year before and had New York down 2-0. And Aaron Judge took away a home run from Frankie Lindor at Yankee Stadium in Game 3, and New York won 3 straight. And, that was the end of what I thought was a really good Cleveland team. So it's been fun to see these two teams playing again last October. I know New York won it in 5 games. I thought the 2 games in New York were not well-played games by either team, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find 3 consecutive games here in Cleveland with New York that had better drama in the late innings than those 3 games had, with the Yankees eventually winning the pennant here in Cleveland. Those are what playoff baseball is all about. And, John, something we don't see that much anymore in late innings, comebacks or runs scored because the closers are so good.
Well, it really is true. We're going to break, Tom, but we're going to come back for another 10 minutes of your expertise. So let's do this. We'll break, sell some things, and then get back right here at 77 WABC. And we're on the air with not only one of my good buddies, but one of the great broadcasters, Tom Hamilton of the Cleveland Guardians. I have to stop. It's been many years, and Tom is going to the Hall of Fame. Why don't we talk about that for a minute? First of all, what did you think when you got the phone call? And what are you thinking now? I don't even know the dates. I never know any date. But you can go ahead and explain when it all happens.
Well, when I got the phone call back in December, I thought they had the wrong number. So, it's very humbling. It's overwhelming. And, we're very grateful. I don't feel that I deserve to be there, but, I'm very grateful for the call. Like I said, you're a Hall of Famer in my mind. There's so many that were on that list that, you feel like are certainly Hall of Famers, should be there before I'm going in. But it is what it is. And like I say, we're very grateful. We're very humbled for it. It takes place the last weekend in July up in Cooperstown. And, it's going to be neat, too, that CC Sabathia is going in because, of course, he started his career here in Cleveland and had such an incredible career overall, both here in Cleveland and in New York, with a 2-month stop by in Milwaukee once we traded CC in 2008. So I think the world of CC and his wife Amber, and they have such a great family and so deserving for CC to go in as a first ballot Hall of Famer. So like I say, it's overwhelming and it's still very surreal.
Well, this is your business, and now you're being put into an institution where it's the highest end of the business. So, I've said congratulations to you before, and
yes, thank you.
I mean them. It's funny about in our lifetime, Tom, we're really seeing changes. You go along day by day, then you have to stop and think, boy, what a change. I'll give you a change. I love newspapers. I'm a newspaper reader, and I don't have a smartphone, and I don't have a computer, so I'm not on the Internet. And in Cleveland last year, I couldn't get a newspaper. I could not get a newspaper. And so before one of the games, I went to Mr. Hamilton and I said, "Will you do me a favor tomorrow? Would you stop somewhere and get me a newspaper?" And you said to me something that is really kind of frightening to someone like me who grew up with 6 newspapers in New York. And you said, John, I don't know where I could stop and find a newspaper.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It is, and I know it's the reality and our changing world and whatnot, but I'm like you. I miss having a newspaper, although I do have a smartphone and a computer, but, we were also raising 4 kids at the time that the newspaper just kind of stopped being delivered, and the kids were always, getting their news as the kids are. We live in a world now where, I hate to say newspapers have become obsolete, but they really have.
Oh, absolutely.
Instantaneous the way you can get your news. So, I don't always think all changes are for the better, but, you don't change with the times and you're going to get left behind. But, when you asked me that last year, I chuckled because I was like, literally, John, I wouldn't have a clue, because you can go in a drugstore, and it's unlike New York in that, you can still get newspapers, but, it's also the difference in the sizes of the cities. And I think the subway and train travel has a lot to do with that for New Yorkers as well as compared to cities here in the Midwest.
Well, I'll give you 2 stories. I love them. That's why I've remembered them. One occurred to me in Boston. Now, I never go anywhere without reading material. And so I'm in the back of a cab in Boston. That was a few years ago, Tom. And we stopped for a light, and the cabbie kind of turns to me and said, we're a bunch of dinosaurs. And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "Dinosaurs were the last people to read newspapers." That's one story. It's true. And another happened in a soap opera that Susan and Michael and myself used to watch, Young and Restless. And in Young and Restless, in this scene, the older brother, Jack, is supposed to be, I guess, late 40s. And the younger brother, Billy, is supposed to be, I guess, mid-30s. And so Jack says to Billy, "Gloria's in jail. Don't you ever read a newspaper?" And Billy says, "I never read a newspaper, but I haven't been online yet." So, I mean, that's, and that story, we were visiting Young and Restless when we were out to play the Angels for the Dodgers. And, that's really a true story, and that tells you a little bit about life, because that is art imitating life.
Well, it is. And now that we have grandchildren, it's like, wow, how did we raise our own kids the way we did? Because that's even changed on how your own kids are raising their kids compared to what we dealt with. But you know what? I'm sure our moms and dads thought the same thing when we were, experimenting with the new things in the world. It is as it is. So I'm just glad we're still here to talk about it.
You mentioned that Detroit is going to win the Central because they have a really good team. I mean, it's not because they're trying harder. It has to do with players. Tom, Mike Krzyzewski was being interviewed by a group of writers before an NCAA tournament a few years ago. And they were obviously blowing smoke at him. And Krzyzewski said, look, he said, coaches don't win games. Players win games.
Bingo.
Players. So you'd have to say that Detroit, because they were down for so many years, I guess they finally have built up a team. I sat next to Scooble, by the way, at the New York Writers baseball dinner. Susan and I got honored. And I was sitting next to Scooble, and he is a really nice guy, as well as being a phenomenal pitcher.
Yeah, I would say he's definitely the best pitcher in our game right now, or certainly who we see in the American League. And we see him more, John, obviously, within the division. and I don't think we play the Tigers anymore unless he pitches. I mean, he's kind of one of those things like when Verlander and Scherzer was here. We never had a series with Detroit that you weren't seeing both of them in that series. And he's great for the game. You know, he will pitch against Cleveland again tomorrow. And Detroit's just having one of those special years too, John. And we've seen it here in New York and in Cleveland where sometimes everything just clicks. And you better take advantage of that special season because you could bring the same team back next year and things would be different. And we're kind of seeing that in some ways this year in Cleveland. It's a different ball club than what we had a year ago. But, yeah, you know, I don't think we're that much worse than we were a year ago. But things that were going your way a year ago are not this year. And so, you know, when the margin of error is small, as it is, you know, with certain payrolls like ours, you know, you better cash in on those special years.
Well, that really is a good point. You know, you made a point before about pitchers that are taken out after 6, and then you mentioned, you know, the names that we know and love, the old-time names, Koufax and Gibson, and I grew up with Rashi, Reynolds, and Lopat, so... But you know, you're a bright guy. Any reason why there are so phenomenal injuries in pitching?
Well, when you talk to people, John, that certainly know a lot more about it than I do, I think the universal opinion is pretty much the same. Everyone is max effort from pitch one. And,
right.
You know, eventually there's a cost that comes with that. I mean, when Justin Verlander was in his heyday, and again, we would literally see him pitch against Cleveland sometimes 5-6 times in a year when you were playing the Tigers 19 times in a season. Justin Verlander did not start the game throwing 98 miles per hour. He would work his way into better velocity as the game went on. He always had something extra in the tank. He could get you out early in games with his 4-pitch mix and maybe be throwing 93, 94, and then when he was in a jam, he had something to reach back for and throw 97, 98. But, you know, we played the Tigers, this is only our second series against Detroit, but back in May, we had one of those early Roku games on Sunday morning at 11:30 in the morning, and Skubal's first pitch was 98 miles per hour, and he pitched his first complete game, and his last pitch in the 9th inning was 102 miles per hour. So, I hope like heck he stays healthy. But, you know, the track record shows those guys aren't going to be able to have a long career throwing with that kind of velocity from pitch one and the amount of spin that these guys are trying to manufacture as far as their breaking ball and whatnot. Again, John, when you talk to baseball people, that seems now to be the most universal belief in that.
I hear
there's
the
no
same
other reason.
I hear the same thing, and that's why they're only pitching 5 or 6 innings. I could go on with this. I have a lot of examples, but we don't have time. First of all, thank you for being on. Secondly,
thank you for having me, John.
Congratulations on the Hall of Fame. I think it's
Thank
fabulous. You. And we'll talk to you soon, and you'll be on again soon. What do you think of that?
John. I'd love it. All the best to you, your family, and all of the great folks in New York.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Now, we have to go, right? Yeah. Vinny Madunio, the great Vinny Madunio, is coming up next. And my thanks to you for listening. I'll see you next Saturday from 4 to 5. And it'll be right here on 77 WABC.
Thanks for listening to The John Sterling Show. You can hear The John Sterling Show Saturdays at 4 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?